virtual book signing and the new face of virtual book signing. I am Dan Weinberg from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, so don't turn your channel. And we welcome you and are pleased that you're with us today for 3 authors. We're doing 2 shows actually, and we'll talk about that as we go along. But thank you for joining us, and all of you who have come in, and not too bad a day, at least it's sunny out there, so we appreciate you coming in here as well. We have 3 authors, 2 of them on this show, the first show, and I'll introduce each of them first. Glenn Brasher is an instructor of, you know what, I haven't done this in so long, I forgot to tell you that. If you want to email in a question while we're live, please do that. And afterwards, if you're watching this on the archive, you can also probably get a first edition signed. We'll have copies afterwards as long as they last. So do get to them if you need to. These are good books, all 3 of these that we're going to be on today. So now, with no more further ado, Glenn Brasher is an instructor of history at the University of Alabama. He's a past park ranger and at the Richmond National Battlefield Park. And today's book is his first, The Peninsula Campaign and the Necessity of Emancipation, African Americans and the Fight for Freedom. It's the University of North Carolina Press, 288 pages and illustrated, and it's $39.95. And for a first book, this ain't bad. I think you would enjoy this. We also have Brian Wills, professor of history at Kennesaw State University and director at the Center for the Study of the Civil War Era. He's the author of the Confederacy's Greatest Cavalryman, Nathan Bedford Forrest, and The War Hits Home, the Civil War in Southeastern Virginia. The book today, his latest book, is George Henry Thomas, As True as Steel, the University Press of Kansas, 585 pages and illustrated, and also $39.95. So you placed your own name in the title of the book, I see? That's not a bad thing. I like that. We're going to be taking a break after we're done, and Bjorn behind the camera, wave, thank you, will be getting on with Mark Fiji with his new book, The Republic of Nature, An Environmental History of the United States. I think you're going to enjoy this. There's a lot of good Civil War in here as well. So, back to our authors that are here with us today. Appreciate both of you being here. Well, Glenn, let's start. Why a biography of Thomas now?
He's Thomas.
I'm sorry, here I am going the wrong way, forgive me. I haven't done this in so long. It's the Peninsula Campaign we're talking about, right?
Right.
All right. So let's go with Brian first. And why Thomas now? And why, after we've had Einhof's book just a few years ago, how is yours different from his, and for that matter, from one that we ourselves publish, Education and Violence by McKinney, that old warhorse?
Mm-hmm. Well, you've actually asked several questions that need to be answered almost independently, so I'll combine them, of course. First of all, when you say steel, that actually comes from a quote by William Tecumseh Sherman. Sherman, who could be George Henry Thomas's friend in many respects, after all they were West Pointers together, roommates for a time, also could be his biggest critic, and frequently found ways to kind of put in the dig a little bit underneath the, in the back, if you will, or at least in the side. And with the as true as steel comment, he started it off with the typical shot at Thomas: he may be slow, but he's as true as steel. So that's where that came from. I do like to use quotes sometimes for titles. The original title for the Forrest book was A Battle from the Start. Nathan Bedford Forrest had said his life had been a battle from the start. So I do kind of like to do that. And I did realize that that was going to be my middle name and it was going to throw it in, and I didn't think that was too bad either. As far as why another book needs to be written now about Thomas, one of the things that I had planned to do was write about Thomas for a number of years before Christopher Einhof's book came out, and the Bobrick book came out as well. And so, you know, I felt I had things that I wanted to say. And naturally, you feel like you're wearing a wire on your body, because the minute you start talking about you want to do something, someone else gets out and tries to do it first. And Einhof did a very commendable job, but I feel like I came to understand Thomas, I think, a little better than he did, found some sources he didn't use. And so I felt like that there was still more that could be said about George Thomas, and I feel like I've accomplished that. And again, I very much appreciated McKinney's book because, of course, he had done such a good job beforehand. So they're really excellent books out there. I just happen to think I saved the best for last.
Is Education and Violence still worth reading after years?
Very much so. I mean, everybody has perspectives, everybody has interpretations. They have an emphasis here that you may not give. Einhoff, just as again a way of answering that question, Einhoff sort of puts Thomas as if he's an early civil rights champion. I just think that's not realistic for Thomas, and we can talk about later why that might be. And I feel like I've made him a little bit more fit in the context of his times than try to impose him in a more modern context.
Well, of course, the lack of correspondence has been a problem for everyone who works with Thomas. He destroyed quite a bit, and it's hampered our understanding. You say that there are materials more numerous than expected in showing insights into Thomas. What did you find that helped you out that others didn't have?
Well, at the Filson Library, there were a number of personal papers that were written to staffers. You actually have one that you'll reference a little bit later that everyone can look forward to seeing. And that is the type of thing, it doesn't necessarily go into enormous details, but it gives you the glimpse here, the snapshot there. And so in a lot of ways you can fill out the story of Thomas with the absence of those papers. But you remember I had, with Nathan Bedford Forrest, you've got a man who's got 6 months of formal education and writes painfully. So I'm used to trying to take whatever sources are there and try to use them to the fullest possible. With Thomas, I had a lot more to work with than with Forrest.
No, I'm sure. Well, Glenn, let's go to, you have an interesting thesis here, and you make it forcefully. You're saying basically that in 1619, a Dutch ship brought slaves to the peninsula, and in 1862, slavery began to die there.
Right.
Give us an explanation of how you got to this book and what basically it's about. We'll get to the minutiae as you go along. And also, I know you want to talk about your dust jacket. So
Right,
go ahead and
right.
tell us all of that, please.
Well, in many ways, it's going to sound kind of strange, but in many ways, I feel like I was destined to write this book. One of the first historical questions I ever asked as a 12-year-old, I saw the miniseries North and South. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that. And I remember there was a scene in it that supposedly took place on the Peninsula Campaign, and they ran at the bottom of the screen the Peninsula Campaign, spring of '62. And I wanted to know, is this accurate? Is this what actually happened? And so I went and I grabbed the World Book Encyclopedia, those wonderful encyclopedias that actually my family still has. It's in my brother's living room right now. But looked up the Civil War, and it was actually, the article was written by Bruce Caton. So good place for a young man to start, reading Civil War history. So the first historical question I ever asked was about the Peninsula Campaign. And then later, as a college student, I saw the movie Glory, which really was probably the biggest influence on pulling me into a passion for Civil War history. And of course, it's all about African American participation in the war. So I really got interested in the African American role in the war. Later on, I became a seasonal park ranger at Richmond National Battlefield Park, and the two things sort of began to come together. I got really interested in, did African Americans have an impact on the strategy and the tactics of the Peninsula Campaign and the Battle of the 7 Days? And so, as a master's degree student at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, which I used to have to explain who they were, now that they've been in the Final Four, people know VCU a little bit more. But anyway, writing a paper there on the role of African Americans in the Peninsula Campaign in the 7 Days, I discovered that in fact they did have a major impact on the fighting of the Peninsula Campaign. Wrote a paper on it, which was pretty successful, but I felt like there was more to say and that there was more to develop there. And so when I became a PhD student at the University of Alabama, I wanted to find out if people at the time recognized that African Americans had had an impact on the fighting and on the Peninsula Campaign. And that led me to doing a lot of research in newspapers. It led me to do a lot of research in some of the writings of Lincoln's cabinet members. And what I discovered is that, in fact, the Northern public, had a very profound understanding of the impact that African Americans had on that campaign, and it was one of the pivotal things that made them want to embrace, the military necessity of emancipation. And so that's what the book is about. It's about, the role that African Americans played in the Peninsula Campaign, in the battles, the strategy, and the tactics. But in the end, more importantly, as you mentioned, it comes around to making the argument that this is one of the most pivotal events that made Northerners embrace the military necessity of emancipation.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have to jump in and say something. You said we could do that, so I had permission. I went to the University of Richmond, so we always said VC who.
VC who.
That's what we would say about them.
Right.
But to make it up to you, my mother sold World Book and Childcraft, and the way I got interested in history was reading Childcraft articles about Robert E. Lee and George Washington and all that. So we both have a World Book connection.
I love those World Books.
Well, I hope that, I don't know about World Book, but Britannica, is just
also
now
a good,
said
yeah.
that they are gone with print.
Oh.
So I hope kids who are attuned maybe more than we are to the internet will embrace Civil War, new ideas through the colder medium of a screen. But Britannica just decided no. Quickly tell us what you liked or why you used this particular dust jacket.
The dust jacket. Well, the image there is a watercolor that was done by a French observer who was on the peninsula with McClellan's staff, the Prince de Joinville, and he did a series of watercolors when he was on the peninsula observing things. And that particular one is one that a scene that he observed right after the siege of Yorktown, and it's a couple of Union soldiers discussing directions with a slave, and that image really sums up to a large degree what the book is about. Mm-hmm. And so when I saw that, I was determined to get that for my cover. It's a long story about how I actually was able to obtain it. I won't bore you with it, but it involved communication across the Atlantic Ocean with museums in France, and eventually discovered that the museum in France has a friends group in New York, and I got in touch with them, and long story short, I was able to get this image that's on the cover, and I'm really happy about that because when I first saw that image, when I turned the page and looked at it, the very first thought I had was, oh, this has got to be my book cover. And so there it is. So
I see it many times from authors. As they're going through and they're thinking back of their minds about book jacket art, many times they hone in on something just comes to them like that.
That one spoke to me
immediately. The publisher
immediately.
may not think that.
Well, my publisher was happy with it right from the start, so I was very pleased about that too.
Yeah. Did well for that.
Now, Thomas's demeanor and his character, whom he was, permeates your book. Tell us a bit about what was his demeanor?
Well, one of the things I try to do is to get past just a chronology of his life and times and try to understand the man. That really is, I hope, the secret of everything I try to write. To me, that's what makes history interesting. It's what engages you when you can make a person come alive. So part of I wanted to understand the complexities of the man was we have a tendency to simplify things, and again, when you sort of say, well, Thomas is slow trot, and you emphasize the Rock of Chickamauga, the things that people are more familiar with, the man slips underneath that, and I really wanted to try to get at who he was. I think you have a man who is utterly devoted to duty. He definitely believed in preparation. He was meticulous in his planning, and that was for almost every phase of his life. But he was curious. He's got a scientific bent that I don't think people fully appreciate. He has an interest in the arts and literature that I don't think, again, that comes across all that much. He's not a public individual, and he doesn't express himself well in public, and he doesn't express himself often in public. So what you get with Thomas is one of both the positives and negatives about the letters we do have. When he's in correspondence with close associates, with family members, he's more forthcoming in his opinions and in his viewpoints. And he had strong viewpoints. But he's a Southerner, he's a paternalist. I don't think there's any question about that. And he's certainly a product of the world that he lives in. So again, to try to sort of put him into a little different world is a bit unfair, because that's not the world to which he belongs. He definitely is a 19th century Virginia born individual, and so I think you see that. Solid. I think you could depend on him. I think you could understand that when Sherman suggests at one point in the Atlanta campaign he's my off-wheel horse, that he's saying that I can depend on Thomas to keep pushing forward and pulling forward. At Petersburg, one of the jobs I had was I was serving on a cannon crew, and like Confederate crews, we had 6-horse teams, and the pair of horses closest to the limber, the ammunition chest on wheels, are the wheel horses, and they're the ones who really provide the energy, but they also provide the brakes. You don't have a handbrake on a limber chest, so you're going to have to go in and get the horses to do the work. And I think Sherman recognized, although again he would say if there's a furrow, Thomas's army, the Army of the Cumberland, will stop and entrench. He's slow. They're not as good marchers as McPherson.